Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. I'm president of Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting. My website is emailrevealer.com. You can go there and get an autographed copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. And don't forget, this show is brought to you by GetTheTea.com. Life Change Tea. It really has changed my life. I've been taking this tea about 12 weeks now. You wake up in the morning, drink one big glass of this nice, cold, refreshing tea. You don't need any coffee. It helps you with your digestion, your complexion, weight loss. I lost about 20 pounds since I started on all this. A life change tea. Been riding my bike, been swimming, took a little break. I got a little ear problem going on. I almost went deaf this week. got a rough week, guys. But the tea's getting me through it. Life Change Tea at GetTheTea.com. And there's all different kinds of supplements on there, so just check it out. Also, too, real quick, before we get to our guest, our surprise guest, as I announced it this week, we've updated the members section at OppermanReport.com. I got a couple new shows up there. One is Chris Fields, who was a first responder at the Oklahoma City bombing. And he's the man in that iconic photo where he's holding a little baby. Little baby died in his arms. So we had him on there, and we had a wonderful discussion. We got into PTSD. Then we had, I was interviewed by Sherry Wisdom, and she brought me on her show at the last second on Saturday. And we talked about Stormy Daniels, we talked about Pizzagate, and we talked about one of the topics we're going to be talking with our good friend, our next guest, our surprise guest. Okay. Can we guess who we got here, guys? We got Douglas Dietrich from the formerly Revolution Radio. I haven't talked to him in about 3 or 4 years, but good old Doug interviewed me about 5 years ago on his show. He had 2 shows, Firing Lines and Critical Omissions, on Revolution Radio. And he invited me on there, interviewed me. And then week after week after week, every Saturday night, I'd come home from coaching basketball, and Doug would mention my name. He would mention my name and spur me to call in. He'd egg me on to call in. And I'd call in, I'd rant and rave for a good 20 minutes while Doug sat back and drank his tea and put his feet up and let me roll. Doug Dietrich, how are you, buddy?
Oh, much the better for speaking with you, Ed. Believe me, you have no idea how glad I am to be here. And as I've told our dear Mr. David Romero just before we got on air, I was saving all my cathartic inventing so that the listeners could be entertained by my meltdown in front of them. Really, I just want to get down on my knees and kiss the ground. It's like being someone who's escaped from North Korea and managed to make it across the demilitarized zone into the South. And it's just been a nightmare time. And I'm very glad now to be speaking to yourself. And this will be Ed's way of introducing me, not just to the listeners, but to the staff of American Freedom Radio, many of whom are refugees or escapees from the Revolution Radio nightmare experience.
Well, let's start with a proper introduction. Yes. The owner of the station is named Danny Romero instead of David Romero. So it's Danny.
Thank you. Sorry about that. My apologies.
Right. Hey, let me tell you something. I've been here a long time. Danny's a cool guy. You don't have to worry about anything with Danny. It's a whole different world. Okay, it's a whole different world. It's a nice, calm, relaxed place. No one's screaming at you. No one's drunk. You know what I'm saying? But let's get started first. Tell the audience, who is Douglas Dwayne Dietrich?
Well, I reference myself as the renegade military historian, and I've spoken of myself as a global crises analyst. And in one way, the second half of that definition, or just that titling, so to speak, is just a wish fulfillment at this point in my life for something that I found was not a worthy pursuit when I was involved with the Department of Defense. And that's essentially what made the Douglas Dietrich that everyone knows as the whistleblower, quote unquote, which is a title that I don't prefer. It's very similar to when Ed Opperman and I were speaking about the old term names for private investigators that just became anachronistic, like detective and whatnot. They just developed too hokey, or just too, they just sounded too pulpish. And so private investigator became the apropos term that imbued some dignity into what men like Ed Opperman have been doing with their careers. And in my case, I prefer the term public informant as opposed to whistleblower. And because whistleblower has kind of like a connotation, like almost like a stool pigeon or a stooge in certain ways. And many people who have been classified as whistleblowers have become patsies or have taken the fall. Many of them have wound up in prison or under house arrest or in exile of some sort. It's not a happy or glamorous position to be in, despite the fact that sometimes directors like Oliver Stone, for very questionable reasons, will make films about people like this. And in my case, I worked for the Department of Defense for almost a decade. I very much, during that period of time, wanted to laterally transfer into a think tank with many of the global crisis analysts who were working with the DoD. When I had an opportunity to do so, and we're talking about when I was in my 20s, I met some of the men that I had grown up admiring and had wanted to meet and wanted to emulate. And I was just truly floored in what I can say was one of those life-changing moments when they asked me to strut my stuff and show what it was that I predicted for the near future. And, of course, I gave them my analysis at that time. And we're speaking about in the mid-'80s. And I predicted the collapse of the Soviet Union based on the demographics I had seen working as a department researcher. So heard what I had to say about the collapse of the Soviet Union, the rise of fundamentalist Islam, Asia ultimately filling in a demographic vacuum in Siberia, and all the reunification of Germany. All of this I had predicted in the 1980s based on the cycles of history, as opposed to simply taking current events and trending them into the future, which is what many science fiction authors do, as opposed to somebody who's trying to analyze the dynamics of the world around us. But then it was William F. Dunnigan at the time, who used to be a top designer of war games or conflict simulations, was the Department of Defense term, who took me aside afterwards, along with a number of the other men who had witnessed my presentation. And they said, well, what you said is very impressive, and we agree with you. We find no reason to disagree with any of your conclusions. You're very astute. And they basically told me that I couldn't possibly work with them because basically I wasn't going to fall into the team. And I said, well, why would that be? And they said, because all of us were really just scam artists. We're taxing, the American public for what amounts to an unimaginable sum. It's literally incalculable, based on the myth of Soviet superiority and the fact they're always going to be here. And many of these men were science fiction authors, by the way. Men like Jerry Pernelli, who wrote The Mote in God's Eye, very definitive works in science fiction in the 20th century. And Jerry Pernell is another pronunciation of the individual's name. Larry Niven would be another one. These were all Department of Defense affiliated people. And they projected the Soviet Union as a permanent entity, just a part of the human condition that would be with us until we literally stretched out into the stars and expanded into the universe, that there would always be a Soviet Union. And of course, when I realized just that these people were lying through their teeth, that they knew the Soviet Union was on the verge of collapse, that they nevertheless kept pushing it as a threat on behalf of the Department of Defense, so they could keep taxing the American people for for basically a non-existent threat, I realized just how fragile the entire system was, and just how it was all facade. The entire consistency of civilization as we knew it was paper thin. And so that was one of the motivating factors behind my becoming a public informant. I began to leak, hemorrhage, actually, vast amounts of information. I was never caught doing it because of a lot of corruption and incompetence in the United States Department of Defense. And ultimately,
well, let me ask you this, Doug.
Happened was
how did you leak the information? There was no internet back in those days. How did you leak it?
Actually, in those days, what we had was there were various whistleblower protection agencies that had developed because of the Watergate affair. And what happened with Watergate was a man who, after that point, became more of a role model to me than the war game designers and the think tankers, was, of course, the individual who was involved with Watergate. And he was a former Marine. I'm trying to remember his name because I'll be quite honest with everyone. I'm normally asleep at these hours, and I don't so much sleep as I die and reanimate. So I'm still oxygenating and caffeinating. Help me out with this, Ed. There was the individual who was involved with RAND, which is an acronym for Research and Development. He leaked the Pentagon Papers.
Yeah. I know. 1 second. Boy, I mean, they just did a movie about him, The Post.
Yeah, but Ed knows who I'm talking about.
Yeah, something Berg.
Yes. So,
Ellsberg, Daniel Ellsberg, Dr. Daniel Ellsberg.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. We both should remember him because, he leans towards our politics, really. Daniel Ellsberg is, he was very much a hero of the left for obvious reasons, because at that time, the president was Richard Nixon, who was an arch conservative, some would say reactionary. He was nothing compared to the alternative right of today. And Daniel Ellsberg, of course, I could relate to him later in life because one of the ways they attacked Daniel was that they raided his psychiatrist's office and discredited him at the time. This was considered a discredit by exposing his PTSD, the fact that he was being psychiatrically treated for post-traumatic stress disorder. Of course, these days, someone like myself is very verbal, very open, and I want everyone to know I have been psychiatrically treated for post-traumatic stress disorder, and so I don't consider it anything to be ashamed of. And nowadays, you have many people who try and project or pretend that they have PTSD in order to give themselves a depth of character they otherwise wouldn't have, as a matter of fact. And that is something to watch out for as well amongst many people. But real post-traumatic stress disorder is not something anyone would want, and it's a condition that is a psychological injury. Just to clarify for everyone, it's not a mental illness. So in the days of Nixon, Daniel Ellsberg was being attacked as someone who was mentally ill because he had leaked the Pentagon Papers. But the reality was, he suffered a psychological injury, and post-traumatic stress disorder alters the very shape of the brain, shrinks certain areas of the brain, very similar to Alzheimer's. So it creates a physical distortion of your ability to think or mentate or process. So you're as injured the rest of your life as if you had a leg or an arm blown off, or both. So depending on how extant the PTSD is or how severe it is, and there's different gradations of it. So Daniel Ellsberg was also facing well over 100 years in jail. And it was only the fact that at the very last minute, just prior his sentencing, they brought in evidence that Nixon had ordered his men to break into Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office and steal his medical records, and that therefore the evidence presented against him was all to be dismissed because it was gathered in an inappropriate and illegal manner. And that's what saved Daniel Ellsberg's ass. And so we're when you speak of myself, I was working through people who had networked with journalists after the Ellsberg incident had created the Pentagon Papers scandal. And they were organizing to protect people who were leaking information. And through them, I managed to expose many things like the war games, like Operation Northwoods at the time, various other war games in San Francisco, where they were literally spraying various kinds of diseases that were not necessarily fatal, but these were diseases just being spread to see how many people would get sick, so that they could test the efficacy of dispersal systems for biological weapons. They actually did this over the city of San Francisco. And of course, people did die, because if you throw out something that you feel is a casual influenza that'll just make your normal adult sick, there are oftentimes where people who are far more vulnerable with compromised immunosystems or immunosystems that haven't developed, like infants and senior citizens, that will die. And that's what happened. Infants and senior citizens did die because of these tests. So these gradually were leaked to the public, but the amazing thing was nobody responded to them. These became known to academics. They became known to independent researchers, or people who were very good at digging up information, like Ed Opperman. So that was how I leaked such information at the time. And got away with it, though, because much of it was records that most of the Department of Defense never paid attention to, because they just accumulated, like reflexively. People would write reports. Reports would be collated. They would be stored. And then after a certain period of years, they'd be destroyed. And so because of this, there was no real oversight. And so it wasn't like what I was doing was some major act of espionage. Not to say it wasn't illegal. It was theft of federal property. So by all normal definitions of the term, I am a criminal, just as Daniel Ellsberg was technically a criminal. So it's only decades later that I outed myself and went public, because at that point it was far too late. The government intervening at that point would simply confirm everything I said and validate what I said. So their best strategy, which they followed to an extent so far, has been to ignore myself completely and to try to get everyone else to ignore myself completely. So that essentially is the Douglas Dietrich that everyone knows of. There's other aspects. I had other careers besides that. After I got out of the DoD, I went into private security and mercenary work for almost a decade. And then I spent a little over a decade caring for my parents while they were dying, being a senior advocate, a medical advocate. And that was a third career, essentially. And it almost killed me. It's the hardest thing anyone can do, is to be a care provider. And now my fourth career is essentially what I'm doing. But in order to do what I'm doing and to take credit for much of what I've leaked, because a lot of people, like Ed Opperman, will confirm this, that Ed Opperman for decades was hearing about Operation Northwoods. He was hearing about things like the experiments in San Francisco. But of course, there was never any credit. There was no Julian Assange. There was no Edward Snowden. There's nobody stepping up.
No, actually, Doug, I had the guy on my show who did the Freedom of Information Act request and obtained the Operation Northwoods documents.
Good.
Yeah, he just wrote a book about it was a detailed book about World War II, which is not my topic, you know. But yeah, I actually had him on the show. Let me say, because you're originally.
Let me clarify something with your saying that, though. There is a great difference between the Freedom of Information Act attainment of documents. The reason people do that is so that they can show the public that these documents exist. Most of the documents you get through the FOIA are so heavily censored, they're so heavily redacted, as to be almost useless. Even though what he got, I'm certain, was shocking, it's only a fraction of what was. And the reason he knew to ask for it was because of what I had leaked originally. Otherwise, how would you know what to ask for? You understand what I'm saying, yes?
I do understand what you're saying, okay? And like I said, I had the guy on my show. Okay. He never mentioned you, Doug.
They never do.
Hey, well, let me ask you a couple of questions. Now, you were born in the Philippines.
No, I was born in Taiwan, which is just north of the Philippines archipelago. And It was the Nationalist Republic of China, which relocated to the 100 Islands of Formosa, which is the Portuguese word for beautiful island. The Spaniards had overtaken the Philippines archipelago, and the Portuguese had overtaken the islands of Taiwan. But the Taiwanese people, who consisted of both natives, such as the Asian version of American Indians on the islands originally, as well as Chinese communities that had been extant there for hundreds of years, fought back, and they were the only colonized peoples to overthrow a European regime in the history of colonialism. Other indigenous peoples had fought back and scored tremendous victories, such as the Zulus, such as Native Americans for many years. But ultimately, all such peoples were conquered just by sheer numbers and firearms, etc. The Taiwanese were the only people who successfully overthrew European colonials and reestablished a indigenous government. So that's how that stands out in history. Later on, the nationalist Chinese relocated there. It was part of the Japanese archipelago for almost 100 years, and it was heavily Japanized and acculturated into the empire, and then the Chinese moved in as modern Chinese people, the more recent wave of immigrants, when they vacated the mainland when the communists took over. So please continue.
My question was,
point you were going to make.
Yeah, I know. I'm not going to ask you what time it is. Tell me how to build a watch. I love you, Doug. I love you. But listen, so you were born in Taiwan. How old were you when you came to the United States?
I wasn't that old at all, to tell you the truth. I was born in 1966. We probably came over around 1969, very late 1969. Came to San Francisco. The first place we went to was upstate New York, where I stayed for about a year. And then when we went to San Francisco to escape a very abusive family situation, meaning my father and my mother had moved in originally into my grandfather's home, his residence in upstate New York, to take care of him, to be care providers for him. But he was so violent. He had worked at Eastman Kodak Company for his entire life. He was severely chemically poisoned systemically throughout his nervous system, not to the point where he was debilitated physically. It's important to note that the man who developed Kodak chemicals, George Eastman, whom the company was named after as Eastman Kodak, ultimately killed himself. He committed suicide because he was suffering severe systemic pain for which there was no treatment or cure or painkillers that worked. And he blew his own brains out because of all the chemicals he was working with all his life that produced the film industry that we, as we knew it in the United States for many decades. So my grandfather was like that, and he was very abusive and he was very violent. So my family had to ultimately relocate to San Francisco. By the time we got here, it was 1970, and I was still very much, of course, acculturated by my late and sainted mother into the languages of Chinese and Japanese, because she was half Chinese and half Japanese herself. My father was European American with some Native American blood. And when we came to San Francisco, I was immersed in the Asian culture spectrum again. So that was a much healthier environment in many respects. And my life would have turned out quite differently had we stayed in the Northeast. It was a very different world back then. So what was your...
So you were born in 66. I was born in 62. Well, one question I have for you is that I recall from your Facebook postings, I don't know if this is something you want to keep private, but it was public on Facebook. You would post pictures of yourself as a child wearing women's clothing. Can you explain it?
Oh, yeah. In San Francisco, of course, my father understood when he was in the Navy. My father was a career sailor, and he understood when he moved to San Francisco that it would be an unusual environment. One of the reasons people move to California is to escape not just the rest of the United States, but really escaping European cultural mindsets and paradigms almost completely. California is part of the United States strictly by geography. San Francisco goes beyond that to what many people would think would be Oz. And so my father knew he was taking us to a radically different cultural spectrum than anywhere else in the world. but he felt it was worth it to provide at least a different environment where we wouldn't be judged, because there would be so many people here with their own out there and bizarre behavior patterns that we would not be judged. And the issue, if you could call it that, not as a negative judgment, was that he also knew that the city had a huge gay community. And he knew this because as a sailor, the United States Navy, whenever they found out a sailor was gay, they would basically give them what was called a pink discharge. They would hold kind of like a kangaroo court-martial, basically very quietly process them with the minimum of paperwork out of the Navy as quickly as possible, so they wouldn't have homosexuals basically going wild or having orgies on the ship, whatever fears they had, whatever concepts they had of what homosexuality could lead to. So over the literally the centuries, it's important to remember that San Francisco and the Barbary Coast have been here since before there was a United States. And the oldest building in San Francisco is the Officers Club in the Presidio military base of San Francisco. So for well over 100 years, they had been dumping homosexual men into San Francisco. It's just where they would leave them. So it developed a large former sailors gay community. And my father wasn't here for that. He was actually here because he wanted the Asian community to provide my sister and myself a environment that would be suitable for our Asian background, where we wouldn't be persecuted or bullied. And because, and I'm going to avoid using the term unfortunately, but because there was a convergence of the gay culture in San Francisco as well, because of my appearance, I was very much a point of attraction for gay men. And unfortunately, and this is where the unfortunate comes in, San Francisco was very much a place because of the California prison system, which is enormous. People don't understand this, but the state penitentiary system in the state of California is so immense that the highest paid police force in the entire world is the California State Penitentiary Guards Union. They are paid so much that they have the salary equivalents of attorneys or doctors or lawyers or CPAs. So that's how big the industry is of prison systems in California. And many of those people get paroled into cheap places, of course, like San Francisco's Tenderloin District. So there were many predatory men with homosexual persuasion based on their years of imprisonment and sex with other men that attempted to rape myself as I grew up. So as a defense against that, I would dress as a female because most men in San Francisco, just by my experience, this is not to say the way it is today. We're talking about a very different San Francisco while I was growing up, where the homosexual community was different. There was also a criminal community that was practicing homosexuality, but not homosexual in the gay community sense. And this converged into an area where I was either being hit on all the time or people were attempting to rape me. So by dressing as a female, I was able to avoid all of that. And because my sister was older than me by about 3 years, and girls grow up much faster than boys do, all of my father's clothing was able to fit her in terms of hand-me-downs, and all of my mother's clothing would fit me in terms of hand-me-downs. It just worked out that way. My sister was very much sex negative towards men because of her experiences with our violent grandfather in upstate New York. So yes, I'm very public about all of this because I do try to educate people onto the dysfunctional dynamics of so much of the United States that they're not willing to talk about. Of course, many people are speaking of these sorts of phenomena now, and that's important. And I feel that my being open and frank about this sort of subject has been part of that opening up process of the American underbelly of dysfunction. So hopefully that puts that in some perspective.
Yeah, you got to understand, see, because back in the old days, when I used to go on your show all the time, I would get so many questions about you. Doug. One of the main things I would get emails was questions about you. What do you think about Doug about this? What do you think about Doug? And I would say, listen, man, it's a mystery. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. But now, okay, so now you were dressing as a female. Now, what about when you went to school? Did you use a female name?
When I went to school, I had the name Douglas Dietrich, and it's amazing that most of the time the teachers wouldn't even take note. A lot of people don't understand this was San Francisco, and beyond that, it was a very bizarre time in American history. And a lot of it had to do with the Vietnam War. Ed Opperman, of course, as he is saying, he's only a few years older than I am, and he was a child of the 60s, and I was born in 1966. The Vietnam War, of course, was winding down and around 73 when they were Vietnamizing the conflict under Richard Nixon. But in terms of the actual war itself, it didn't end, so to speak, for the American mindset, at least, until 1975. For the Vietnamese, of course, it never ended for many reasons, one of them being several Chinese invasions or attempted invasions of Vietnam after that. But the main point is that we had the Vietnam War ongoing, and one of the ways that very liberal, well-intentioned, and idealistic progressive academic professors, one of the ways they would help young men avoid the draft was to get them into teaching positions. And that changed the entire nature of the American educational system. And so when you had the old days, America had one of the finest educational systems in the world at the time of John F. Kennedy. And the backbone of it was a lot of elderly women and school marms who spent all their time teaching kids the three basics, reading, writing, and arithmetic. All that went out the window during the Vietnam War because all of those women were essentially dismissed and replaced in very large numbers by young male draft dodgers. Now, it's not that this was an evil thing to do, but it had repercussions. And a lot of these young men were not trained to teach. They didn't care to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic. And instead, they were introducing topics like sex education, which was being introduced in schools at that time. It was introduced in almost every grade I was in from age, it had to be from sixth grade at least. And so we had young men teaching sex education, astrology, not astronomy, but astrology, because this is what they knew. That was the vogue at the time. Witchcraft. Nobody questioned my being dressed as a female. Instead, they were teaching the kids in the sex education classes about alternative lifestyles. So, yeah, they would bring the boys up to the head of the class. And I got to avoid all of this because all the teachers basically thought I was a girl with a boy's name. And they just said, oh, it's some Asian thing or something. And maybe his parents just gave him the wrong name. And so they just had the other kids go to the front of the class, a couple boys together and practice kissing, just to show that this is not evil. This is not bad. Now, all of this might be considered a form of brainwashing and whatnot. It's something I grew up with. It was the environment in San Francisco, the environment in the public educational system, the San Francisco Unified School District. So, and it helped me avoid being raped, going to and from the school, going home. I was much safer that way. And the interesting thing was, whenever anyone found out that I was a boy, the repercussions were usually they would attempt to rape myself, or they would attempt to basically try to blackmail me by saying, oh, I'll tell people you're a boy if you don't have sex with me. You'd better have sex with me. It was disgusting. But I grew up very cynical about men. The majority of men, I grew up with the impression that the majority of American men are far more interested in the domination of a younger man, and that seems to turn them on far more than sex with women. And of course, it might have been regional and whatnot, but I've noticed something similar in many parts of the world.
At what age did you start dressing like a man?
Well, when did I start dressing?
Yeah, at what age? Yeah.
Well, in a sense, I never did. I always had the ability, of course, to switch roles, but I became much more casual about switching roles as I got into basically community college age, and where it was no longer necessary to dress as a girl for my literal physical safety. I didn't need to.
Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it. because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities.
Do that anymore. So by the time I was in community college, it was I was dressing as a male. I was actually dressing as a male more often by the time I went into high school. And that's an important point. We got rid of junior high school during the age that I was going to school. During the time I was going to school, we lost an entire grade because they switched from the junior high school system to a middle school system. And they established what they called middle school. So my generation lost an entire grade of education. And we went straight into high school. I went into a vocational school myself, and which was John O'Connell at the time, which no longer exists the way it did. There's an entirely new building called John O'Connell Vocational Institute in San Francisco, not at the same location as the old one, which was torn down, actually demolished because of many of the things that had gone down there at that school. But basically, that's when I started dressing as essentially a male.
Okay, one last question about your dress. Okay, we'll move on to other topics. So today, though, you solely dress as a man, and do you occasionally also still dress as a woman?
Oh, I dress as a woman often.
Do you really?
Because of the environment of San Francisco is such that, and also it was part of what I've done for years with the underworld community. Basically, the other way that I stayed safe to protect myself while growing up in San Francisco was to join an ethnic gang. And of course, in San Francisco, ethnic gangs, they're not simply street gangs. The ethnic gangs in San Francisco, the Sinotongs, Chinese mafia families, these are, the Chinese word tong simply means hall, like a meeting hall. And but it's come to refer to tongsters or gangsters. And the Chinese economy in San Francisco is largely, or was for many years, largely an underworld community. That's no longer the case at all. But at that period of time, I joined the underworld in order to maintain safety. They protected myself, and in return, I had to do things for them. And so I was very good at entrapping men dressed as a female. And that was something I've done for them for years, as recently as like last year. I'm getting older, of course. It's increasingly difficult for me to do such things. But it's something that I've done with them throughout my life. And not all of that has been in the United States. I've had to go south of the border to do this at various times for what we've been dealing with. And I've, of course, carried it out, obviously successfully, till this point in life. It's not something that I probably can continue to do much longer, obviously, but that's one reason why I maintain the ability to do what I do. And most of it these days is just for fun, simply because people are having parties in San Francisco and whatnot. And it's just that kind of community. So it's no longer a deviant. It's not a deviant behavioral pattern. Have you spoken about this publicly before? I'm sorry?
Have you spoken about this publicly before?
Oh yes.
Okay.
It's just what's amazing to me is that most people don't seem to bring it up that often.
Okay.
It's one of those things where people speak of it, but they don't usually bring it up in interviews, or they don't usually bring it up in. I'm happy to speak.
Okay, I'm not making you uncomfortable by bringing it up.
No.
Okay, good. I got one more question too, because it's another question that everybody always asks. Your relationship with Lorian Fenton, right? You'll call her like your mistress, and to what extent does that go? Your relationship, as you described.
You realize Lorian Ann Fenton and I are entirely severed.
Oh, no, I did not know that. No.
Oh, yeah, that was, Lorian Ann Fenton, it was just a term that was used from the Asian cultural perspective. Okay. From the Asian, I'll be happy to go into that, though, simply because it's part of the whole Revolution Radio experience that turned out the way it did.
Now they're starting to make more sense to me. Okay, because I know she has a lot of influence over there.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And none of it makes any sense. Mike Ringley hates her.
Right.
He hates her. I've been very public about this on air, by the way. And that was the one thing that Mike Ringley would tolerate, that I would get on air and talk about Lorian Ann Fenton.
Wait. I know, but before we get into Lorian Fenton and Revolution Radio, I just want to cover up some other stuff in there. How did you come to work for the Department of Defense, though?
Oh, yeah. The Department of Defense, that whole thing it took years of reflection to even begin to realize the dynamics behind how that happened. I was observed probably from a very young age. It was probably around the time there was a very violent incident that I've spoken of before, which ultimately resulted in my grandfather, my father's father, the man who worked with Eastman Kodak, dying. And at that point, probably they started observing myself with the military, because the military basically has, shall we say, there's a kind of a horrible extended family dysfunction in the military. It's very similar to a cult-like behavior, and it was different at that time, still far different from what it is today. And that's because we had the draft. And the draft didn't end until the 75 or around 73, 75. And because of that, the military was not as cultic or as geekish or as clannish as it is today, where it's truly almost like a mafia. I could go in for hours about that to define that term and explain to people why I use that term. And it's very apropos because the military has been involved with narcotics, various other kinds of trafficking out of Southeast Asia. At the time that I was born, got involved with other things like the Iran-Contra scandal and all the rest of this. It's something that any investigative journalist can tell you about, like Peter Lance or Ed Opperman. They can go into detail about that at any time. But what happened in San Francisco that led to my working with the Department of Defense almost certainly shows that I was being observed from a very young age, because what happened was there was a confluence of events that was just alarmingly connected. And one of them was the assassination of the mayor of San Francisco. There was a man named Dan White, and he was a Irish Catholic, very old school, reactionary Roman Catholic, homophobic. There was a gay individual by the name of Harvey Milk who became known as the mayor of Castro Street, or that was one of the gay districts in San Francisco, and still is, of course. And what happened was that Harvey Milk took the job of Dan White because Dan White was so pathological in his behavior and so obviously psychotic. He couldn't keep his job as San Francisco city supervisor. He was replaced by this homosexual individual who has been accused, and apparently compellingly so, of child molestation. And so people can look this up. They can vet all this themselves.
Milk definitely had 15-year-old runaway boyfriend living with him. So there's no doubt about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And so Harvey Milk replaced him, and Dan White knew this and thought that he was being tremendously slighted by being replaced with a practicing pedophile. And we can all understand his ire, but his response was morally questionable and apparently controlled in the sense that he was probably manipulated. And he actually, the woman who was a lap secretary of George Moscone, who was the actual mayor of San Francisco, she was named Leanne. She was of Albanian descent, and she had a relation with the mayor of San Francisco, George Moscone, who was straight. And she was in the offices the day Dan White walked in to kill these people, and she was pushed to the ground by White, who had his far in the open. Searches, we had nothing in terms of security people have in this day and age. Very different world. And he literally had a gun in his hand, just walked through the door of the city hall, pushed her to the ground, went in, blew out the brains of George Moscone and Harvey Milk. And then he went home and never spent a day in jail. There was a trial. He was let off because he had eaten, literally, this was called the Twinkie defense. They said he ate too many Twinkies and he was on a sugar jag and he couldn't help himself. And so they let him go back home, where he spent the next 7 years in peace. No one molesting him. There were, of course, major riots in the gay community because of his being let off. They were burning tires, setting fire to gas stations in San Francisco. It was called White Night. The gay riots in San Francisco in protestation of his getting off. And later on, he blew his own brains out, just like he was under orders. It was the Manchurian Candidate stuff. And as soon as Moscone was dead, without any election, just by the chain of command, Dianne Feinstein became mayor. And she had some questionable ties to the Jim Jones cult that had led to the Guyana massacre of many African Americans, most of them from Oakland in San Francisco. And she had a lot of questionable things about her, but she became mayoress. And at that point, she became almost like the king of San Francisco or the queen of San Francisco. It's regnant. She was there forever after that, and then became senator and all the rest of this, and is still in politics today. But her entire career was launched onto the national level by this assassination. The other impact was that she wasn't gay, or at least not openly so, and had no use for a lab secretary. So Leanne Prifty was immediately fired from City Hall, where she wound up working at John O'Connell. Now, it turned out because of her Albanian descent, she spoke Shqiptari, the language of Illyria, the language of the Albanians, and was used by the Radio Free Europe, which was a branch of the Central Intelligence Agency, to conduct propaganda broadcasts to Albania so that she could reach people behind the Iron Curtain and foment unrest in the regime of Enver Hoxha, who was the dictator of Albania, the communist, actually Maoist dictator of Albania till the day he died. And so she had all these federal connections. And while I was at John O'Connell, she said, why don't you get a summer job at the Presidio military base? And she knew all about me. My father, of course, was in the military all his life. So when he retired, I was a military dependent. And as a military dependent of a retiree, that means I had access to any open military base, such as Presidio military base of San Francisco, access to its medical care, like at Letterman Army Medical Center at the Presidio military base of San Francisco, and its post-exchange, its PX, until I was of legal age of 18. So since I was under 18, we lost a whole grade, and I was going to high school early, and I was about 16 years of age. She said, why don't you get a summer job at the library at the Presidio military base, since you have a military dependence ID, and you can enter and exit the military base. And so she wound up calling in, got me a summer job, and that's how I became a assistant librarian or a librarian's aide, then ultimately a medical reference technician, because I worked with the Letterman Army Medical Center in terms of their dossiers, their personnel records. In it, they had their own library, as well as a military reference technician dealing with the overall documents of the Presidio military base library. And as well, I ultimately became a Department of Defense research librarian, a full-blown librarian. And so that was my background, and that's how I got the jump. Now, none of this made any sense at the time, but now I realize that Leanne Prifty had connections, and I was probably segued very intentionally into that job, because it was immediately after that I was assigned liaison status to Michael Aquino, who was with the Department of Defense Intelligence.
But before you get to that, though, Aquino, so you were about 16 years old when you went to work for the DOD, and so it was around 1982 then, and you said in the 80s where you briefed them, they called you in to brief them, and you were briefing these high-ranking guys, right? Now, that would have to be...
They're not generals. We're not talking about generals and colonels here. These aren't men of military rank.
Science fiction writers. But the thing is, now, you must have obtained your information to brief them based on the data that you were supposed to be burning, right?
I was doing a lot of documents destruction, yeah, and that was as a librarian's aide and ultimately a military reference technician. And of course, there was a lot of data that was accessed from that, but there was a lot of data that was not being destroyed. It was just on hand for reference.
Okay, so when you were briefing these guys, they didn't say, hey, Doug, where are you getting this information from? Aren't you supposed to be burning this stuff?
It doesn't work like that. It's just available data. They could all access that data. Okay. They're civilians. The United States Army and any branch of service, they don't do anything at some all-expansive level of inclusive activity. Everything they do is contracted out to civilians. It's not like the U.S. Army manufactures its own tanks or its own firearms. Everything goes out to a defense contractor, nor does the U.S. Army or military do its own thinking. Everything's contracted out to a paid thinker. And so what you have are civilians who are basically cooking up the excuse for everyone to be paying the military all the money that they do based on all these threats that are cooked up by the people who are the think tankers. Now, none of these people, even though they have high-level security clearances because of their position, none of them are in the military per se. So you have this entire opportunity for espionage and leak that hemorrhages ceaselessly, except nobody really takes notice. Every once in a while, you'll hear something like, oh, hey, there's some top secret plan that was left on top of a car, and somebody had to stop, basically wipe the shoe off, put something on top of a car, walked away, left it there. This sort of thing happens all the time. None of them cared where I got the data from. They were just looking for my presentation because they knew I worked with the Department of Defense already. They knew that I had access to that data. They knew I was seeking a higher level of security clearance. So they said, sure, show us your stuff. And went through the presentation. And then, of course, they said, well, we can't have you with us. You're just not right for the team. We're basically salesmen. We're pitching a myth. And you can go now. That was what short experience I had with any potential for a career with RAND/MIT, the Research and Development / Massachusetts Institute of Technology. By the way, that is the exact place where Daniel Ellsberg did work. Daniel Ellsberg was working with these men, pitching that scam when he had a crisis of consciousness and decided he was going to hemorrhage the Pentagon Papers.
We've only got about 5 minutes before the break. So why don't you get into your connection to Michael Aquino?
Sure. Then what happened was Michael Aquino said he wanted myself as a liaison, basically a kind of an aide, and a gopher, if you will, more than anything else. And when he put in the request, I was assigned responsibilities with him. And that was how the connection started. And that was probably one of the more aggravating things that I experienced with an individual whose name I'm trying to remember, who was, he doesn't really bear mentioning, but there was this has only happened to me, surprisingly enough, maybe about once, really, that I can consciously remember. And I thank the gods of my ancestors, it hasn't happened more often. But it was with this older guy who was a member of the alternative information community who approached me when I was basically becoming public. And he said, how long were you a member of the Church of Satan? And I said, well, that's the wrong question. You're really starting off on the wrong foot. I was never a member of the Church of Satan. And I explained to him, of course, my affiliation with Michael Aquino was strictly professional, even though that involved increasing pressure from him to convert. And he very much proselytizes, make no mistake about it. And was very active with converting a great deal of the military that hadn't already been converted. People need to understand that Michael Aquino would never have had his position, would never have had his leeway if there had not already been an entire network of Satanists in the military long before he made a name for himself. But to show people the extent of his influence, he wrote the Chaplain's Handbook for all branches of military service. If you're Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, or Army, or Coast Guard, which is a branch of military service, that Chaplain's Handbook is written so that anyone who's a rabbi, anyone who's a Catholic priest, anyone who's an Episcopalian deacon or a Protestant pastor, they're all under orders to step back and stand down whenever a satanic chaplain shows up. Satanism is the official religion of the United States military, all branches of service. For that reason, Michael Aquino was considered the military chaplain for all branches of service, the high chaplain of Satanism for all branches of service. That's why he had access to Air Force bases. People had met him on Air Force bases, naval bases. He was allowed access to all bases of all branches of service, as of course, admittedly, any officer is. But he was active as a chaplain, ministering anywhere he went, wrote the Chaplain's Handbook so that people would understand to bow before him and withdraw. And for that reason, you see the legacy in documentaries that are made, such as The Dark Side of Al-Dura. And The Dark Side of Al-Dura is about the Iraq conflict.
Wait, Doug, before we get into that, we're about to come up to a break. Why don't you tell the audience where they could find your website and how they can get a hold of you? Because we're coming up to a break, and then we'll finish when we get back.
Sure. DouglasDietrich.com. Everybody just hit DouglasDietrich.com, and you'll find what you need. And otherwise, you can just look up Douglas Dietrich on any search engine or on YouTube, and I'm ubiquitous. I'm all over the net. And anyhow,
and what is this one? What is DDDietrich.com? Is that you as well?
I'm sorry, DDDietrich.com used to be me. Yeah, it was a website that we created after I severed with Lori and Ann Fenton, so she couldn't take the DouglasDietrich.com and use it for something else. Once that went free again, the URL, we locked it down. And once it was free again, we finally, it had been free, but it was like in frozen status. I'm activating it again, thanks to the help of a wonderful and anonymous Maquis benefactress who has helped me immensely with reestablishing some of these things. Now we are
okay.
Up and running.
DouglasDietrich.com. And when will your show be on American Freedom Radio? Do we know?
It will be on this Monday and starting from next week, unless, of course, Jordan Maxwell needs some accommodation. I will always, of course, make room for Jordan Maxwell to have whatever he wants. Until we find out otherwise, I'm going to be on Monday and Wednesday, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, starting next week, right after this weekend. And that'll be about 9. What time would that be? About 9 to 10. Yeah, about 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, Mondays and Wednesdays. And critical emissions, we're moving critical emissions over here, and I'm so glad to be here. Hopefully, Ed Opperman gives me a chance to finally break down.
We're going
in front of all of you about my
Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities.
As soon as we come back from the break, we'll be back with more of Douglas Dietrich right after these messages. The Opperman Report is brought to you by SubhashTechnosis.com. Subash Technosis is a search engine optimization and website design company located in India. So you know you're going to save a lot of money and get top quality service to boot. They offer all kinds of services, business process outsourcing, data entry, banking BPO services, recruitment process outsourcing, software testing, offshore research networking, customer care, press release content writing and distribution, and much, much more. They offer website development, e-commerce solutions, mobile responsive designs. Now, I've personally worked with Subhash for over 10 years. This is the man that puts out my press releases. They've done work on my websites, so I can personally recommend SubhashTechnosis.com. You can find the link to Subhash Technosis at OppermanReport.com and also awakeradio.us.
We all have questions. Did he do it or did he not? We all have opinions, but do we really know the truth? New evidence will now be presented and the ultimate answers will be revealed in the explosive documentary, Serpents Rising. Inspired by the bestseller Double Cross for Blood, an independent investigation of the trial of the century, the lies, the myths, and the concealed evidence. Don't miss Serpents Rising.
This excellent documentary film is available at Serpents Rising at Vimeo Videos on demand. Watch it for $1.99.
Hi folks, Ronnie here from Life Change Tea. There's a lot of hubbub about the ramifications of GMOs. First of all, what are GMOs? Genetically modified organisms. Yee! Man-made organisms entering our body, changing and damaging us from the inside out. What's our defense? First of all, not eating them. Second, cleansing from them when we do eat them. Thank God for Life Change Tea at getthetea.com. Life Change Tea cleanses from toxins, heavy metals, and helps flush GMOs out of your body. Our unique blend of herbs help cleanse you from the inside out, helping you feel refreshed and clean of yee. We also carry unique one-of-a-kind supplements. So order online at getthetea.com. That's getthetea.com. Rid yourself of the yee that contaminates your food and water. Go to getthetea.com. That's getthetea.com. Get the tea, your best defense.
You can have your ad played here at OppermanReport.com every Friday night, 5 p.m., and Saturday night, 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And on Friday nights, too, we do a live portion for 1 hour that I just do a live monologue. The ads are very, very inexpensive, and they're also played in the Opperman Report member section. In the member section, you can find all kinds of exclusive content that you won't find anywhere else. It's as cheap as $6 a month, $20 a quarter, or $75 for a year. If you contact me directly at oppermanreport@gmail.com, I'll set you up with a little special deal there where you get a discount if you PayPal me directly, and you can get a copy of my book. I want to thank William Ramsey, who helps us produce the show and book guests. You can find William Ramsey, who's an excellent author, at William Ramsey Investigates on YouTube.
WPR Rebuttal, covering the sides of the story missed by Wisconsin Public Radio, bringing you narratives the UW System Board of Regents won't allow, shedding the light on perspectives the owners of WPR don't want you to hear. Every Thursday at 12:30 Central Time, WPR Rebuttal is your destination for grassroots journalism in Sauk County and beyond. Our host, Senator JPO, provides insightful analysis into stories that are only superficially covered by mainstream press. A recent inventory of topics includes college graduate underemployment, yellow journalism in the media, and favoritism in the public sector hiring process. Get your WPR Rebuttal fix Thursdays at 12:30 Central Time.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. Don't forget the show is brought to you by getthetea.com. Life Change Tea. And I forgot to tell you before, if you go to Facebook and look up the Life Change Tea Facebook page, they have a discount code. You can get $6 discount, free shipping on your tea, Life Change Tea. And it really will change your life. And don't forget, too, we have updated the member section at OppermanReport.com. And I'll give you a discount. We're running a discount sale right now. 13 months for $60. Just email me directly at OppermanReport@gmail.com. I'll give you 13 months. And if you're going to renew your subscription too, even if it's coming up next month, I'll add on your free months to the old existing subscriptions. You won't lose any month if you want to sign up, renew early. We're here with Douglas Dietrich. You can find his website is douglasdietrich.com. He's going to be on here in American Freedom Radio Mondays and Wednesdays. I believe he said 6 p.m., Doug?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's correct.
Forgot to write it down. Now, let's get into the whole stuff, like the juicy gossip that everybody's looking to hear. Now, the first question I got for you is this. The whole fallout with Lorian Fenton, because if you recall, I've been telling you to get away from that woman for years, since the day I met you. Okay? Yes. All right? And there was all kinds of crazy stuff going on. She had your passwords and she was reading your Skype and stuff like that. What the hell was going on with that?
Oh, well, the entire relationship developed as essentially part of my survival strategy to prevent far more graver incidents from taking place in my life on just a chronic and repeated basis. When I was involved with the Department of Defense for almost a decade, much of that time was consumed by my liaison with Michael Aquino. And again, I need to reemphasize this so that people understand it. It was a professional relationship. It had nothing to do with a belief in terms of a sympathy with his cause. Rather, it had to do with my professionally having to become intimately acquainted with his cause and knowledgeable of it in order to professionally serve his needs under the kind of responsibilities that I had been granted. And I had hopes and dreams of ultimately becoming a career, either defense librarian. There was the bigger dream was to enter a think tank. Since that was so disappointing, I became pretty much a subversive and gradually began to worm my way out of the system and ultimately, of course, left the Department of Defense. It was an odd severance as well, and it was not complete and not total because I went back to work for a year after being out for almost a year. And again, a lot of people have a difficult time understanding this, and they think of this world as somehow professional, quote unquote, in the sense of people who are somehow exemplary or somehow upstanding. It's professional in the sense that mobsters would be professional. Actually, I would say mobsters probably just exhibit a higher degree of professionalism in the exemplary sense, in that they at least have a family sense of loyalty, whereas that you don't have that with. It's just a lot of incompetent people or corrupt people who are taking advantage of taxpayer dollars. And I would dare say that every day you look out that window and you don't see mass rape and cannibalism right in front of your eyes on the city streets is a miracle. It's so dysfunctional that I honestly, nothing happens in any productive sense whatsoever unless it's by accident.
But the question was that Lorien Fenton had this control over your life. She had all your passwords and stuff. This was due to... Go ahead.
It was due to the fact that when I was dealing with Michael Aquino after getting out of this environment, he still had a great impact on my life, because at that point he had realized I had basically betrayed him. And the safety that I had was I essentially checked out of the human world after I began taking care of my parents for almost about a decade, during which time, as my parents, it became inevitable they were going to die, that they were going to pass on to transition. I began to publicly out myself. I began to appear with just little interviews at conferences. I instigated this all on my own. At that point in time, I met Lorien Ann Fenton and pretty much realized she was affiliated with Michael Aquino. Now, Ed Opperman is absolutely correct. He never trusted her, and many people didn't. Everybody could see there was something inherently wrong with her. They couldn't understand why I was involved with her. The first thing that most people would say when I said I severed with Lorien Ann Fenton was, took you long enough, that sort of attitude. Now, the reason I was with her and she had all that was because she worked with Michael Aquino. I would never have gotten my position at Revolution Radio but for her pitching me to Mike Ringley as a remotely controlled individual of Michael Aquino. So the entire Revolution Radio was set up as controlled opposition. And when Mike Ringley, who hates Lorien Ann Fenton, has maintained her there over the years, one of the things that he would tolerate, as I said, was my openly defaming her, as people would say, or basically exposing her. And I would be quite blunt about it, that she's simply a tool of Michael Aquino. And basically, one of the reasons I stayed involved with her and allowed her that much control was so that Michael Aquino would get fed just entire rivers of pure nonsense and get misdirected. He would be misinformed.
And that would require her to have your passwords and to read all your Skype messages?
Yes, because otherwise he would not be convinced he was in control of myself.
Okay, and there was something about there was a life insurance policy too, right?
Oh, yeah. Originally, my life insurance policy, my Marine Corps life insurance was made out to Lori Annette Fenton. Of course, when I severed with her, that changed immediately so that she wouldn't be tempted to cash in by attempting something. But not that she's physically dangerous, but it's just one of those things you do as a precaution. You might as well take the temptation away. She's that desperate where she would ultimately attempt almost anything. But she was organizing conferences with the quote-unquote super soldiers, whom I hate that title, that term. These are basically super victims. And she basically, the interesting thing about Mike Ringley, to put this into some perspective with the Revolution Radio and how it dysfunctions. Mike Ringley is very similar, but entirely different from Richard Allen Miller, who's a wonderful human being. But Richard Allen Miller, I don't know if you know him or interviewed him.
I've heard the name. No, I never. He tried to get on the show, but I never had him on.
Oh, okay. Well, Dr. Richard Allen Miller is someone who purportedly worked at Area 51 or very high security clearance kinds of areas, facilities where usually the scientists and engineers who work there have their families living with them. They're like a military base. And what they have is like, instead of military families, you have entire families of engineers and physicists, etc., whose families live on site. And
the thing is, though, it's like 70 minutes. Like if we get into Richard Allen Miller, he'll be here forever.
Well, he's an example of. I'm trying to explain what happened to Mike Ringley and his thought process.
No. First, I'd like to get into because I know that. First of all, I know that Aquino claims that he's never met you. He's never heard of you. Mm-hmm. Right. And there was some behind the scenes stuff that went on with you and me and Lauren and stuff like that. And it seemed to me that she was kind of nervous about Aquino at that time and she was afraid of him. But you're saying
it was,
that was
a fear of him. Yes.
But that was all an act that she was really actually working with him.
Oh, yeah. He pays her rent. He pays $3,000 a month.
He pays her rent. How do you know this?
Pretty much. I'm sorry?
How do you know?
Oh, God, she said as much.
Okay. And she actually...
was always in fear he would stop.
And she booked Aquino onto Revolution Radio with Sean David Martin.
She was one of the factors behind it, yes. The other one was a lady named Vaubert, went by the name of Vaubert in the chat room.
Oh, yeah.
Albert, I believe her name was.
Vera Albert. Yeah, I had problems with her, too. Yeah, I had a lot of problems with her, too. Very strange woman. Now, how was she involved with Aquino, Vaubert?
Okay, so this is what happened with the Mike Ringley. This is the point I was making about the mentation process.
Okay.
Mike Ringley came from a background of some very high technical expertise. There's no denying that for a period of time, Mike Ringley changed the entire nature of warfare. And Mike Ringley did this by during the height of his mental capacity as a younger man. He's not that old. He designed a putric acid sensor, where putric acid is human sweat. And so what they were able to do with this technology was they were able to sow it from the air like air-sown landmines, like an airplane flying over a field and dropping all kinds of cluster bombs that it would be, say, for instance, not explosive, but weighting like landmines. And then you would destroy a population's capability to farm without killing themselves, and you could starve them out. And it was weapons like that.
And where did he get this from? That Ringley had anything to do with this?
Yeah, Ringley, he developed this putric acid sensor that forced men to change the entire nature of warfare on the ground by being constantly in motion so that their sweat wouldn't be sniffed out. And then they wouldn't suffer directed artillery attacks. We didn't have drones in those days at this time.
How could we look this up and verify that Ringley had anything to do with this? From his own words?
Oh, no. I saw records that he had done this when I was a DOD librarian. So I had known of Mike Ringley.
You know this Mike Ringley before you went to Revolution Radio?
Yeah, I knew of him, not personally. I didn't know him personally, but I knew of him. He was credited with developing this technology.
Well, how old is he? How old is Ringley?
He's not that old. I mean, he's maybe a few years.
He's my age, right? So he's my age. Now the thing is, okay, I know we're the same age pretty much. I look at me, it looks like he's half dead. I look pretty good. Yeah. So the thing is, well, then how could this be? Then he would have to be like 18 at the time you were down there reading this. He designed this when he was 18 years old.
Yeah, that was when he was at the height of his mental capacities.
And he says this on the air that he's designed this thing?
I'm sorry?
Has he ever publicly declared that he's designed this sweat thing you talk about?
Oh, yeah. He as a matter of fact, he never actually spoke of it until I brought it up on air. And he was impressed that I knew about it. Okay. I mean, he may have spoken of it casually with his staff. He never really mentioned it on air. There's very little he can remember. This was the point I was making about Dr. Richard Allen Miller. When these people are in these environments, they go through a scanner that they're told is a security scanner to make certain they're not taking their work home because they don't want people smuggling out plutonium or blueprints or something in their pocket, even accidentally or absent-mindedly. So they say you go through the screener. What they're really doing, and I saw the blueprints for this, what they're really doing is they're subjecting the frontal lobe of their brain to basically a scrambler. And what happens is these scientists who are working on these sites like Area 51, this is what happened to Dr. Richard Allen Miller, right, is that whatever he was working on, propulsion system, whatever, he goes through that scanner. He could go home just a few blocks away within this facility because they're built like city blocks and living communities. They're built like residential gated communities. And except, of course, they got massive security. And he would go home to his wife, or kids, any scientist like this or technician, and they could literally say, "So what'd you do at work today?" And the individual in question will simply go blank and say, "I don't remember."
So when you started,
he'll literally not remember.
Right.
Now, after years of exposure to this, it creates an Alzheimer's effect. So all these engineers, all these physicists and technicians, they're all considered utterly expendable by the Department of Defense. And what happens is they become train wrecks. Richard Allen Miller is the nicest individual you can
let me ask you a question.
I was sat next to him for hours.
Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities.
The thing is, though, because then when you and me were friends over Revolution Radio, you never mentioned this to me that Ringley was involved in this kind of stuff.
Never thought that you were interested.
You know? Okay.
I didn't think it was relevant.
Okay.
It's like one of those things where it's like you never asked.
Okay, so it didn't trouble you that he had this kind of background in deep intelligence and stuff like that, and now he's claiming to run a whistleblower type radio station?
Yeah,
which it never really was, which it never really is. There's all kinds of stuff on there that's total crap.
Of course.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
They're all new age.
Yeah, right.
It's or it's right wing, propaganda, right, for the Bundys and stuff. And but what happened was he was exposed to this because of what he was working on, and it had its effect. The difference is, this is why they're exact opposites. It's like Alzheimer's. If you're inherently a nice person and you develop Alzheimer's, you present a nice affect even in decay. That's kind of like Richard Allen Miller, who it's very hard for him to stay focused with Mike Ringley, since he's inherently a horrible person. As he degenerates, his horrific side becomes more and more pronounced and continually lashes out and acts out. He also suffers from diabetes. He also suffers from epileptic seizures. He also, I suspect strongly, has suffered multiple strokes.
But has any of that been confirmed, though? I know it's talked about, but the diabetes and epilepsy, but has any of that ever been confirmed by anybody who really knows?
Oh, yeah. I know for a fact he has diabetes because he got deathly sick when basically he had forgive me, it's glucose or something that diabetics use, and they gave him an expired batch. So he had a batch that was expired, and he was employing that and got deathly sick. I know for a fact.
And you witnessed this, or you know someone who witnessed this?
He told me.
He told you, yeah, right. That's it. Okay, right. Okay, so we have it from his word that he says. Okay, which I don't believe anything he says. To tell you the truth, I don't believe a word he says about anything.
I believe that just by the fact that the guy was he would wake up with his face on the floor. He would wake up with his face on the keyboard. I mean, literally, this happened when I was on air, where suddenly all this like gibberish came out on the Skype box. And I was like, what? And I said, what's going on? And finally, I was able to contact him during the break, similar to what we have going with most of our hosts on American Freedom Radio. They can talk to each other via Skype when the promotions are on normally, not with Ed Opperman because he's got something different. But with Mike Wrigley, when I was able to finally speak to him, he was just coming to. And I said, what is all this gibberish? What are you trying to tell me? I knew something was wrong. And he said, I fell down on my face and I was rolling it all over the keyboard because I was spasming. So he has diabetes. He's got epileptic seizures. It's just awful. I can't imagine how longer he's going to be with us, but I don't want to be there for the death. The whole thing at Revolution Radio will die once he dies because he controls it with micromanagement.
Now, so, what brought about your falling out with Lorian Fenton? You're severing ties with her.
I'm sorry?
What brought about you severing ties with Lorian Fenton?
Oh, well, of course she was stealing everything. That was her job. Her job for Michael Aquino was to make certain that she destroyed as much of my potential as possible. So I had to allow Michael Aquino to conclude she was doing that. This prevented repeated assassination attempts or something very serious from being done.
Let me ask you a question. We were there at the Super Soldier Summit together, right? And we met in person. Now, and I saw you having to go to her and ask her for money for food and stuff like that, right? Now, why don't you just come to me and say, Ed, get me out of here?
Oh, come on now. Do you know what happens to most people who have tried that? Take a look at the super soldiers. Take a look at, for one thing, it makes one look incredibly vulnerable, and that alone tends to discredit a person in the public eye. The idea was to make it look as if I were pathologically dependent on this individual so that I looked as if I at least were contained. The idea was to make it look as if I were contained. So that, of course, placated Aquino to the point where no drastic action was done. Now, let me put this into some perspective for people so people can understand how serious this is with both Sean David Morton and Michael Hemmingson. When Ed Opperman had the misfortune of suffering the North Korean experience of Revolution Radio, he was there at a time when Michael Hemmingson was still alive. Michael Hemmingson, of course, was someone who was an author of erotica, softcore porn that could be sold on mainstream outlets like Barnes & Noble. But he was also a pornographic historian. He would take pornographic book covers and anthologize them as a kind of art that would otherwise be lost. I always appreciated him for this because I myself had been so heavily involved as a younger individual when I got into commercial illustration with pornographic illustration, so I could appreciate what he was doing. But Michael Hemmingson became an investigator of the occult, and his show was The Art of Dreaming on Revolution Radio, and he began to write a book on the Temple of Set, Michael Aquino's Satanic Church. And when he wrote the book, it was co-authored by Don Webb, the heir apparent to Michael Aquino, at least at that time. And then what happened was he began to suddenly, for whatever reason, I don't know, tried to incite a flame war between Michael Aquino and myself. This was after his book was completed. He felt he had a grasp on the Temple of Set, and then he began to try and provoke myself and Michael Aquino into a flame war. And I told him, this, what you're doing is extraordinarily dangerous. And he said, well, we can make Aquino lose his pension. And I said, it doesn't work like that. And I told him, I said, you're risking your life. And if you continue this, you will die. And of course, he died.
Wait a second. You've seen evidence that Michael Hemmingson, which is not his real name, by the way, that's his pen name. You've seen evidence that he's dead?
Do you believe he's not?
I actually called down to Mexico when that whole story came out about him dying in some hotel down in Mexico. I called the U.S. consulate down in Mexico and tried to confirm his death, and I could not. I've never seen anything. I've never seen anything that confirms this guy's death.
Well, I'll tell you what happened, so our listeners know what happened. I certainly never heard from him after that, and I was, of course, relieved because I didn't need the grief. He was essentially becoming basically a kind of a stalker and basically a gang stalker. He was becoming like a harassment agent. He was leaving phone calls. He was being provocative. He was trying to, he was doing the same with Michael Aquino. None of this bodes well, by the way. And when he says, like, why don't you kill Michael Aquino? And this is the kind of naive question that I get from people that's just beyond preposterous. That it's one of those things where this is not a film. I'm not Arnold Schwarzenegger. What Michael Aquino and I have is like a chess game, and it's a chess game with blood, and it is not something where the players kill each other. Chess players do not pull out guns or knives or throttle each other across the board. It's the pieces that die. Michael Hemmingson made himself a playing piece. He put himself on the board, and he was taken off. And in terms of Michael Hemmingson, for what it's worth, the man was, and I'm not quote unquote defaming or slandering this individual. Anyone who knew him knew this. He was openly bisexual. He had a young daughter who was the product of a marriage with a Roman Catholic Mexican woman who obviously did not approve of his lifestyle, wanted the daughter back with her, and he was living with his daughter while living with two other women and having men and women visit them, and he was having open sex with these two female partners of his and whoever would visit. So ultimately, the mother got the daughter back in her custody. He told myself, and he told anyone who knew him, he was never, ever going to go down to Mexico to try and reclaim his daughter because he knew that would be the death of him. Well, he wound up dead in Mexico, and the coroner's office in Mexico reported that he had fallen from...
No, the coroner's office didn't report that. That was some hotel manager that supposedly contacted Mike Ringley because he found some kind of Revolution Radio document in the hotel room and contacted Mike. That whole story is so full of holes. And by the way, too,
that's even more suspect.
Right.
That makes it even more suspect.
Let me tell you something.
I was told.
Let me tell you something. Okay.
It was the coroner's office, so I just took that. But I never.
I contacted the coroner's office. But the thing is, too, is I had some interactions with regarding his custody and all his problems down there. Okay, and he had many reasons to disappear. And stage his own disappearance, which I've never been convinced this guy's actually disappeared. And another question I have for you is that you had all these problems with him, but then after he's dead, you go on the air saying about what a great guy he was.
Michael Hemmingson?
Yes, you and Lorian Fenn. About how wonderful he was. Everybody was crying crocodile tears about this guy.
I put up basically, shall I say, some banners commemorating his death. Yeah, I said that, he was a nice guy because I tried to remember the positive things about him.
Okay, well, that struck me out as well. So what is it that causes it?
Well, when somebody dies, what am I supposed to do? Piss all over the...
Well, you know what? Well, if you piss on them when they're alive, you know. But anyway, we can disagree on that. Now, so...
Well, just to finalize that here, because I think it's an important point, I will stand by the fact that the majority of the time that I knew Michael Hemmingson, he was involved in a dark path that would have taken him ultimately perhaps towards horrible destinations, because he was involved with Feral House Publishing in San Francisco, which was run by Adam Parfrey, and they did books that they published on Satanism, the Temple of Set, the Church of the Final Judgment. I'm trying to remember the other.
Yeah, Feral House actually has Process Publishing. They have a part of that thing is called Process. Yeah.
So
now that's a whole other thing too, because he tried to hook me up. They wanted me to do a book, and he hooked me up with them too. They wanted me to write a book. I said I wanted nothing to do with it. So yeah. He was definitely
good for you.
No, sure. He definitely was hooked up with them, and a lot of other things he was up to.
Yeah, but because of his involvement with pornography, which was an industry I had been involved with, I could relate to him. I could relate to the fact that he was trying to preserve some element of history that would otherwise disappear. So I try to see the positive in what he did. So it's I think back on that before he became whatever he became and then disappeared. So, and when he disappeared, of course, and was no longer, shall we say, bothering me, why shouldn't I say nice things about him and just say, okay, he was, I try to remember the nice aspects of him. I mean, at least for that period of time, at least give somebody a grace period after. What they used to say in Africa is at least wait until the vultures have fed. Your turn.
We're done like 30 minutes. We got like 30 minutes left. So now what is it? What caused it? When did you leave with Lorian Fenton? When did you split apart with Lorian Fenton?
It was a long time ago.
Really?
Honestly, it feels like forever at this point, but I was involved with Revolution Radio for over half a decade. So I severed ways with her fairly shortly after you and I had physically met. It was shortly after that conference. I mean,
No, it couldn't have been. It was like a year, because I didn't even get a show on Revolution Radio until after that conference.
So it was like...
I was on there at least a year and a half, yeah.
Let me see, 3-4 years ago. Keep in mind, I've done my best to purge everything I can from my mind about the experience.
So now you two, she's no longer your manager. You got back all your paperwork and you signed all that stuff that she had. You took over that, your control of your own life, right?
Yeah, but keep in mind, there was nothing that was legally binding. I mean, even the insurance policy, the Marine Corps life insurance policy, is something you can change with a single signature. So what I signed over to her, I easily signed back to somebody else. But Laura Lee Solomon took over her position for it's been feels like forever now, about 3-4 years is what it feels like. I mean, you were on Revolution Radio for a fairly short period of time before you just finally had it.
It was about a year and a half.
Yeah, about a year and a half. So it was during that period of time I was severing with her or because the process was always ongoing for me, where I was like stringing her along and preparing to leave. It's in my mind, it's like a process that happened forever ago, because I was never really someone who liked her. She was such a repulsive individual, and her memories, of course, showed that she was heavily controlled and manipulated. Everything that she spoke about indicated that, and I could go into that in detail. But in terms of Sean David Morton, to show people the involvement, Sean David Morton was somebody who ripped off so many people for so much money. He made it into criminology textbooks. So people can actually vet this. They can look this up. Sean David Morton made it into actual criminology textbooks. And one of the things about Mike Ringley, this is the odd aspect of it that I'm trying to talk about with the mind degeneration, kind of the mind swipe. Right. Mike Ringley was convinced he runs his own life. He's convinced he runs his own life. He was adamant in such a way that you had to believe he was sincere, that he never wanted Michael Aquino on Revolution Radio ever, that he would terminate anyone who interviewed Michael Aquino. This is what makes the Sean David Morton incident interesting. So Sean David Morton was wanted by the IRS. He was wanted by the Federal Exchange. He was wanted by various authorities for all the millions of dollars, literally millions. He ripped off people's entire life savings. And what happened was that one day when Ringley said, "Oh God, I'm so sick, I'm going to take a day off," then Sean David Morton said, "Oh, I'm really sick too. I got the influenza too. I'm going to take a day off." And he told Mike Ringley he was going to play a rerun. And then Mike Ringley retired that day and just checked out. During that time, Vauber made certain and Fenton that Michael Aquino came on with Sean David Morton. That was the only time, at least till this point in history, where Michael Aquino has ever been interviewed on Revolution Radio. And Mike Ringley was totally out of it. Now, I protested heavily, and nothing, however, was to fire Sean David Morton. But I do know that Mike Ringley did admonish him and did tell everyone in the staff, don't ever have that individual on again. So Mike Ringley at least was convinced this was the aspect of the controlled opposition. Mike Ringley's brain is degenerate, but he's also convinced he's doing all this himself. But in reality, his entire station is controlled opposition, and they've gone so far as to introduce in Studio B. They couldn't put it on the same Studio A with myself because it would just look too glaringly obvious. But in Studio B, the junior studio, which nobody listens to, they put on Clyde Lewis 5 days a week and Richard Dolan, who are both heavily recommended by Michael Aquino. Clyde Lewis is an open Satanist and has spoken of this. And, of course, you've got Richard Dolan, whose books are always promoted by Michael Aquino. And they brought them on Studio B on Revolution Radio. They're Christine Joanna Hart, who I know you remember, sure, of course. And she, of course, her earliest memory in life was being physically violated by Michael Aquino. She's gone on record about this, so it's not spreading rumors. She's been on record about this several times, and of course, she's still much under his control. She was mercilessly exploited by Miles Johnston, and now she's kind of trying to be as neutral as possible and doing readings and whatnot. But she was basically a penetration agent for Michael Aquino. She got on because I brought her on to Revolution Radio because she came to me saying that she was looking for help, that she wanted to escape the influence of Michael Aquino. At that point, I was totally severed with Lori and Ann Fenton. So
No, you weren't. No, you weren't, because I remember warning her about Fenton. And she talked to me after she had a hold.
You might have been under the impression I was still involved with Lori and Ann Fenton, but you can ask anyone.
I was there. Anyway, this isn't a major.
Lori and Ann Fenton was still very much strung along for, like I said, years. Lori and Ann Fenton maintained a kind of delusion that she was under control. Certainly, there were people that I wanted to think that in general, but anyone can tell you who's been listening to me for years. The person who most people think was controlling or dominating my life was the manageress you never heard of, Laura Lee Solomon. And so
I heard of her. I heard of Laura Lee. She actually she gave me her name as a reference one time. I was taking out a loan. She gave me her name as a reference.
How many years ago was that?
5 years ago. I remember that. I got a good memory, man. Unlike you. Now, but how did you?
I do a lot of drugs.
Yeah, but you know what? I got to tell you something.
Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities.
Did you write down the questions when I asked you the question?
No, what do you ask?
Because you kind of go off on a little tangent, a little bunny trail, then, but you always come back to the question, like you remember the questions. Very, very interesting interview technique you have there. But anyway, back to the subject at hand. What date did you sever ties with Lori and Fenton?
I can't give you an exact. It's nothing I really kept track of it. It was a process that went on for a long time. It was when it finalized. Was at some point she had to be told she was fired by Laura Lee Solomon.
Okay.
If Laura Lee Solomon were on air with myself, she might remember, but she's been through so much stress lately, she might not either. It was. I couldn't tell you. I mean,
then it must have been
a lot of my time trying to forget everything.
Okay. Then it must have been uncomfortable for you then, because she does have a lot of power over there at Revolution Radio, because she brought so many hosts over. Half the hosts she brought in.
She did.
Right.
She did. That's important to emphasize, was that essentially Revolution Radio was established by Lori and Ann Fenton. There's no doubt about that. And it was established as controlled opposition. I did my best to sabotage it and turn it into a living nightmare for Michael Aquino. And one of the ways that he, when I began severing with Lori and Ann Fenton, Christine Joanna Hart was introduced as almost like a takeover. And now bear in mind, I do need to emphasize this. Christine Joanna Hart it depends on how you interpret it. She could be seen as a victim. She could be seen as a knowing agent. But my impression in the time that I spoke with her in intimate detail for hours at a time, personally and privately, was that she is almost like a victim, and but she's very much still involved with Aquino and speaks to him regularly. She wanted vociferously and vocally to bring him on as an interview subject on Revolution Radio for years, but I constantly ran to Mike Ringley, and he threatened to fire her if she ever did that. That policy will probably still hold as long as Mike Ringley is alive. It's one of the few vestiges of control that he feels he has. Okay,
let's move on from Hart.
So you have that.
Now, what caused you to? What happened? What was it? Last Wednesday or Thursday? It just happened, like the 15th, 2 days ago. They cut you off the air. What happened?
Oh, it was building up for months and months. It's building up for years. Mike Ringley the man is, we've already gone over some of his medical issues, and they're obviously impacting his thinking. He's hostile, he's paranoid, and he's just very greedy and very petty. And worst of all, the reason he is not to be a character of any sympathy is because he is a merciless exploitationist. And everybody at Revolution Radio is a volunteer. Nobody is getting paid. That's anybody on his staff is also of that nature. No one is paid.
I have to disagree with you there again, too, because I know when I was there that some of the volunteers, quote unquote, were getting paid.
That I didn't know. Yeah. I'll believe you. Yeah. That would explain their behavior. Yeah. That wasn't supposed to be the way it was, but I'm sure that all kinds of things were happening under the table. So I appreciate that information. it makes sense. I mean, that's there you have there.
I got to tell you something else too, because like with my YouTube channel, right? At the time when I was over there, my YouTube channel was making $300 a month. And their YouTube channel, since they got 70 hosts, you hear them all the time, we got 70 hosts over here, we got 70 hosts. So they were making 70 times what I was making? Is that possible, They had to be making 10 times what I was making on my YouTube channel.
At least.
Right?
No,
at least.
He's horrible. He's horrible. And the horrible thing was, there's this wonderful lady named Rose Dio. She was homeless for a period of time. And she was working on videos for myself, still is, dear lady. And he was gang stalking her. We have all the screenshots. He himself, several of the hosts, like Jerry LeBoyer, named Jer Bear as his avatar in the chat room, David Sharon, all these people were sending her threats, literally threatening her. We've got the screenshots of it. And so he was gang stalking her, trying to drive her to suicide. In order to stop her from making my videos, because he claimed he had total ownership over anything I or anybody produced. Now, all of this is entirely illegal, of course, because obviously a person like Ed Opperman speaking for themselves, he owns himself. Ed Opperman is himself. What he produces with his own voice and his own image without some contract being signed is his as much as the station he's on, and he can do what he wants with it. Ed Opperman has every right to make a YouTube video of his stuff, and none of that was being allowed for anybody at Revolution Radio. But I, of course, wouldn't listen to Mike Ringley. I told him I told him that Rose Dio can do what she wants, and he has no control over her. And so finally, it was driving him to madness. And he began to dispatch his gang stalkers in the chat room. So this had an unfortunate effect where it terrorized my producer, Laura Lee Solomon, out of the chat room. It terrorized everyone out of the chat room. And ultimately, people began to pull their subscriptions in protest, which he blamed on Rose Dio. So the cycle of violence just kept going worse and worse. So he finally got to the point where he was verbally expressing killing Rose Dio. And when it got to the point where he was breathing down my neck while I was on air, I pretty much expected that my days were numbered there. And and of course I told him, it's your gang stalkers are terrorizing everybody out of the chat room. They pull them out, and maybe people will come back and start subscribing again for all the subscription money you're losing, which couldn't have been more than a few bucks. I mean, this was the insanity of it. The man was so monofocally obsessed on what couldn't have been more than the subscription to Revolution Radio Archives is less than $5. He lost like 40 subscribers. So what's his limit? Is it? He's losing like what? 5 times 5, at the absolute most, 50 subscribers, half 100. If he lost half 100 subscribers, he's losing like what? Times $5 a month. I mean, it was insane. Yeah,
but I'm sure there was a lot of donations too, because on top of the subscribers, there's also donations that come in. And I know a lot of donations would come in during your time period and under your name that would go to him. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Yeah. He made $2,600 a month off me, $2,700 a month. That was with those alone. And he's I own you body and soul. You're my slave. And he would send these out, these circulars to everyone. Yeah, I own you. I'm not exaggerating. It's preposterous. It's monstrous.
Well, that's interesting. See, I never got any kind of thing like that. When I
started later.
Oh yeah, because when I went on there, it was with the deal I could do whatever I wanted with my show, and I right away I knew right away there was trouble over there, and I started simulcasting right away. By April, my show was only out there like 3 months, man. And I said, this is insanity here. I got to start getting on more stations because this is insane. There's trouble here. I said, oh my God. Yeah. So now, but then with no notice, they just shut you off the dead air?
No, with no notice. What happened was they did this chicken dip thing where, first off, it was a very important day to me because it was Mother's Day. It was Mother's Day Eve day was Saturday, the 13th, I believe, something like that. So it was that day I dedicated that transmission to my late and sainted mother, and I spoke about many things. We had that very day the Taiwanese American Cultural Festival, Taiwan Meigwa, Taiwanese American Cultural Festival. So I had been at the cultural festival all day. I spoke to that, and I spoke to several subjects, but mostly I spoke about the Golden State Killer. I will cover all these topics again in my first two transmissions with American Freedom Radio, so people will know what was censored by Revolution Radio. And I was comparing that to crimes by quote unquote African Americans, and there was a lot of fear of African Americans that was manifested in a lot of actions taken lately. It's a terror. I'll go over that in my next two transmissions on Monday and Wednesday. But what happened was all of that was censored. Mike Ringley said, "Oh, we didn't get anything on tape." And I says, "Oh, but I just invested," and I said that on air. Pretty much that day, I had invested $200 in a brand new microphone and earbuds and a cable and an Ether cable to the modem. So I knew everything was working perfectly from my side. And yet he claimed every single host and hostess recorded perfectly that day, but he just couldn't get mine. Mm-hmm. And so I said, I'll say everything again on a Tuesday. So on Tuesday, when I went on and began to say the same things again, he came on personally and just shut it down. Then he tried to pull this chicken dip thing where he told the staff, "Oh, I'm just waking up, trying to catch up on what's happening. What's going on?" And it's just so sleazy, like everything about him. He's we're only scratching the tip of the iceberg, but the man is probably the vilest, one of the vilest human beings you'll ever meet. And there's somebody who, when he dies, yes, I will happily on his
say it.
Forget the respect that I gave Michael Hemmingsen. Okay,
I'm going to hold you to that.
I hope that makes Ed happy.
I'm going to hold you to that, Doug. I'm going to hold you to it. Now, you said he was breathing down your neck while you're on the air. Give me an example of that.
It's just like when I got on the server, he was there, and he was just basically, letting me know he was there, and don't do anything wrong. And I'm like thinking, like, don't you need some sleep? Because he's, diabetic and stroking out and having epileptic seizures all the time. But no, he's there. He was just, and then he cut it off. Then he cut off while I was on air. That was just a creep.
Let me ask you a question. I think I've been fair to this whole interview, right? You have any?
Well, I'm fine with it.
Okay, good. Okay, I want you to be comfortable. But now, you and me had a little falling out. You blocked me on Facebook, right? And it was right around the time when I was reporting on Weisenberg. Can you explain what was behind that?
I don't even remember what Weisenberg. As for blocking yourself on Facebook, that could easily have been Lori and Ann Fenton, or maybe at that time, or it could have been myself. I don't remember.
Okay.
It's not, by the way, I'm not coming at this from the anything other than this is what happens with a life that just has a lot of drug and alcohol abuse to forget a lot, which is common amongst post-traumatically stress disordered people. So I don't want people to misinterpret this and say, "Oh, this is an example of mind control." Rather, this is an example of somebody who has basically intentionally tried to lose their mind as much as possible, or aspects of it. So that's the most I can say about that. But is there something important about Weisenberg that I should know about?
Well, just because all the allegations out there about, the whole story about Weisenberg, right? He was convicted of possession of child pornography while he was in the military. Then he went to work for Revolution Radio, and he was out on the run for molesting a top.
Okay. So that's the guy.
Right.
There was, okay. So he must have been the guy who was literally living with Kat Jenkins.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Yes. Okay. So that's the guy who was living with Kat Jenkins. Yes, I remember that. Well, I would certainly never block you over that.
Well, because I was banned from the station for that, because when I started reporting on Weisenberg and his activities, what went out far and wide was that if anybody has Ed Opperman back on the station, they're banned from the station.
That's right. And I had you back on.
No, you didn't. No,
you remember that.
No.
You banned me because I pulled in the ratings. I had you back on a few times after that.
Nah, no way. No way. I was way gone by then.
Did you? But you appeared, and Mike Ringley himself showed up to complain about it in the Skype text box. You were on with myself a few times when when we were talking about, you were correcting your daughter's age. I had your daughter's age wrong.
Oh yeah. I called up and yelled at you on that. I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember that. Yeah. Yeah, those are some good times. I say it was fun, because I really used to enjoy that, because I come home and I'd hear my name mentioned on Doug's show, and you try to get me riled up to get me to call in.
Right.
We always had a good time, man. You're very good, very talented showman. Yeah, you got a real gift there. So we got about 10 minutes left, man. What do you want to leave us with, Doug?
Well, basically, I'm sorry, go on.
No,
something else.
No, that was, what do you want to leave us with? Is there anything I haven't covered in your life, or do you want to tell the audience?
Well, the most important thing to realize is that we'll be covering aspects of my life that anyone wishes to cover while I'll be here for hopefully the foreseeable future. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to come on with Ed Opperman anytime he wants, and we can go over any subjects he feels need further attention. All he has to do is let myself know that he wants me on. I'll be happy to show up, barring, of course, anything else happening at the time. And definitely, I'm open for that. And as for the Weisenberg situation, if I was still involved with Lori and Fenton at the time, it was probably her that blocked you, thinking that probably knowing I would let you back on, and that might get me banned from the station. And she assumed I was under her control. She assumed that until the last minute. She was the last person to know. Everyone knew I was parting with her, except her. By the time that I parted. And so it was one of those things where she was very much in a world of her own, with her own mind control and her own desperation at all times to serve Aquino, or her rent wouldn't be paid. Well, how do you know her rent's paid by Aquino? You've seen canceled checks. How do you know this? She's told you this? How do you know this? She told me that. If I had her on the show, if I had Lori Fenton wants to come on the show and deny this, would she deny this, or would she admit this? Oh, she would deny it. She would deny it. Okay. It's like Michael Aquino denies ever having met me, right? Right, right. You know, what are they going to say? The stupid thing about it is how predictable it is. Just so people understand, everyone thought that I had wrote an email to myself threatening lawsuit from Michael Aquino. And Ed Opperman was the man who traced the email address to Michael Aquino. Yeah, I checked that email for you. And I never talked about that on the air either. I've kept that quiet. Yeah, the Makino electronic address, and so Ed Opperman, of course, is someone I consider an ally. I can't imagine us having something falling out, some kind of falling out, where I would have blocked you. So it must have been Lori, and I just didn't even know about it. I must have realized it later when I took over my own timeline administration and saw that you'd been blocked, because I obviously.
Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities.
We're friended again, right? We're friends on Facebook. No, we're not. We're not. No, that's okay. It's okay. It's okay, Doug. You didn't hurt my feelings. It's okay. Oh. I'm just kidding, man. I'm just kidding. Oh, okay. Well, I'll extend a Facebook friend request to you. And in the meantime, the people knows how glad I am to be here. Now, well, let me ask you this. Indicative, by the way. This is indicative of what was going on at Revolution Radio, the insanity, the exactly what Ed and I are talking about right now, the dysfunctionalism that it engendered in everyone's behavior, and of course he has been mentioning, of course, that if I had any affiliation with Terry Joyce and the rest of the staff here, I would be, of course, was done, quote unquote, and that's a threat that could be read many ways. But there we have that. Now, he was. When you have the show here over on American Freedom Radio, you're going to take calls like you do over there. It's going to be the same format. I don't intend to take calls. I took calls for 5 years at Revolution Radio. Literally, it was bordering on 5 years, and the problem is that the overwhelming majority of people who listen do not call. Right. You've got a 100% listener base. About something like, if you're lucky, 10 to 20% of the people listening will call in. They tend to be the same people over and over again, and that can make people. It gives people the false impression that these are your only listeners. That they get the impression that this poor guy's only got 10 or 20 listeners, and two of them call in, and basically what I had was about half a dozen callers, maybe about 2 dozen generally, half a dozen regular, and they basically concentrate on the same subjects, and you would have thought by my callers that the only thing anyone cared about on God's green earth was Howard Phillips Lovecraft and the Cthulhu mythos. That was all anyone cared about. That was the majority of my calls were always that. And after about half a decade of this, it's just said it's not productive. This isn't going anywhere. So I definitely have no intention of normally taking calls. Obviously, I'm open to suggestions. So if something happens that people feel you really need to take calls on this, just say it. Whether it's Danny Romero or Ed Opperman, I'll be happy to do so. But most of the time, I don't intend to do that. My show will be Critical Omissions. What I had on Revolution Radio was 2 shows. Critical Omissions was when I monologued. Firing Lines was when I took the calls. And after many years, I just stopped taking the calls. So I'm just taking the Critical Omissions show over here 2 days a week, at least for now, and monologuing. I found out as well that when I have guests, my ratings go way down. People tend to just listen to hear myself monologue and update them and draw historical parallels. And so mostly it will be that, though I will have some guests on, people I'm obligated to, like Daniel Arola and Ben Estenius, who have helped me out in the past with many, many things. And of course, yourself, if you want to come on. If you obviously you have your own show, I don't see why you'd feel the need to do so. But if you ever wanted to and you felt it was imperative, of course, I would allow you on my show as a guest. My problem is I've never really produced and taken calls by myself, except maybe once, and I'm not quite sure how I would work that. I would work it, though, through your staff, because American Freedom Radio actually has staff, unlike Revolution Radio. They actually call us, by the way, and bring us on server, as opposed to us calling the server ourselves. I had to maintain an outdated Skype for years because Revolution Radio server would only lock on to an outdated Skype that was 5 years old. And so I literally, have only now upgraded to Skype to take this call and to conduct my show from this point forward. So I've got a new Skype finally. So
I'll tell you something else. Danny is always a friendly voice. You know what I mean? You're never going to have a problem with this guy. Well, maybe you, because you're difficult, but never me. I never have a problem with him. Because I get along with everybody. Unlike Doug Dietrich, who has a lot of problems with a lot of people. I get along with everybody.
That's unfair. That's unfair. Don't believe him. No. Well, I understand where he's coming from.
No, but you absolutely will. It's a friendly place, man. Everybody gets along really good. There's a chat room and stuff. You can hang out. Now, we got only a couple of minutes. So tell everybody again, remind them where they could find you, your website, and when your show's on, all that kind of stuff.
Oh, DouglasDietrich.com. And of course, I always help American Freedom Radio. Hopefully we'll be doing a fundraiser soon. I would be very happy to participate in that. We have to keep American Freedom Radio going, and it's not some horrible private enterprise of basically slavery that you have with Mike Ringley. By all means, if anyone is involved with Revolution Radio, pursue it with the Employment and Development Department. Pursue it with anybody who investigates labor fraud. Do everything you can with those people. What Mike Ringley is doing is. It's just it's a disgrace, but in my case, I'm also, of course, open to donations and certainly could use them this month to make rent. So I avoid becoming another homeless veteran, and so just check out where you can help me with that by going to DouglasDietrich.com, and also check out what you can find there. And obviously very happy to be here. I'm ecstatic. I'm literally in shock. I'm still in shock. And really, as I said, I want to break down and just cry and hug Ed and, of course, Danny and Terry and everybody here. And thank you for this wonderful haven, this site that I could find a home at finally, as opposed to that haunted house on Horror Hill that makes life a living hell just by participating with such people. But yet it was a necessary experience because it's part of this lifetime career I had of seeing things from the dark side. And being able to express to people in grisly detail what the dark side is. So I've left the controlled opposition, and I'm now with American Freedom. I think it's a very apropos.
We're freedom here. And Doug, we're out of time. Thank you so much. Douglas Dietrich, DouglasDietrich.com. Mondays and Wednesday nights, 6 p.m. Critical Omissions. Good night, Doug.
Good night.
Okay. Oh boy. What a guy's got a man. He's got a lungs of a teenager. He asked him a question. Hey, Doug, what time is it? But, I got to tell you, man, when I first met Doug, he was the first one who interviewed me over at American Freedom Radio, at Revolution Radio. And always enjoyed talking to Doug. You say, the guy's a fascinating guy, man. Fascinating guy. All this stuff. The number one thing we would get, on my calls, when I used to take calls on my show, the number one call we would get was, hey, Ed, man, what's going on with that Doug? What's the story with him and Laura Ann? What's the story with Doug? What's going on with it? And I just say, man, listen, I cannot explain to you. I do not know. But he's a fun guy to talk to. And he's going to realize in a couple of months what a nightmare he's been through over there. It really is some kind of a cult, a mind control cult over there. That's just such misery. And it's just, you try and plug away and get your work done, get some good guests on the air, and it's nothing but harassment and distraction and spinning your wheels with nonsense and gossip and foolishness. So thank God Doug got away from that. Thank God he got away from his manageress. That was a whole spooky situation as well. Anyway, God bless you, Doug. Good luck. Doug Dietrich, DougDietrich.com and DouglasDietrich.com. You can find him on American Freedom Radio Mondays and Wednesday evening, 6 p.m. Now, if you like today's show, check out OppermanReport.com. We have a special member section, and we're really trying to get caught up on bills this month, guys, and we're really in bad shape because we haven't caught up for the past couple of months. So I know a lot of people, their memberships are coming due in June and July, okay? Because remember when you signed up last year, I gave you 13 months. A lot of people, I gave you 14 months because I was in such a good mood. Okay, and now here we are. We're stuck. I got $400 Cox cable bill coming up again, and this is every month, man. And I'm exhausted from all this. So I need you to become a member. OppermanReport@gmail.com, and I'll give you 13 months for $60. Nice little discount there. Otherwise, you just go to the website OppermanReport.com, and you could sign up for a month for $6, or 3 months for $20, or a year for $74. But if you do it through me, at OppermanReport@gmail.com, I get the money right away. I can pay my bills this month to keep food on the table and everything we got to do. Having a really bad week. Yesterday was one of the worst days I've had in a long time. Like I said, I had this deafness thing going on. I had a friend of mine, who was someone I really cared about, just really being rude to me for no reason, just very rude and insulting. We lost our friendship. I'm not going to tolerate that kind of stuff. I haven't been working out like I should be for a couple of reasons, which I don't want to get into on the air. So I got to get back in the swing of that. And I've been working on this case for, a couple of years now. And it took a little hiatus there for a while. And I got into a fight with a client. Then I got down on my hands and knees and I begged the client to come back. And we had it going again. And we had a big snag again. It's a big case. It's a big payday. We're just taking down an evil guy and making him pay through the nose. And just, I'm just exhausted from all this stuff. So it's been a little tough getting these shows out here and getting people booked and stuff like that. I heard from Doug last night. I brought him on the show because I know everybody loves him and they like to hear him go on and on. But it's been really tough for me. So if you can help out with a membership, I'd really appreciate it. And help me get through this week here. OppermanReport@gmail.com. Thank you so much. Remember, all these shows on Awake are brought to you by emailrevealer.com. You can go to emailrevealer.com and get a copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. You also do all the kind of different services for you. Online dating service investigations called an online infidelity investigation. And that's where you give us your husband or your boyfriend, your girlfriend's email address, and we trace it back to their online dating websites, and we return a list of all the dating sites that email is registered to. We can expand on that investigation and trace it back to porn sites, escort service sites, swinger sites, gambling websites, and even prescription drug websites, and all kinds of digital forensics, computer and cell phone digital forensics, where we can recover deleted content from an email or a hard drive and produce a report for you that you can use in court. That's emailrevealer.com, or you can contact me
Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities.
Me at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com.
Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities. Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities. Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities.